1450 to 1750. Okay, so kind of two things maybe to be looking at as we go through the stuff here today. One of which, on your Unit 3 packets, you notice how every one of these packets now, there's been this person that has done like the one map that has all of the world notes on it, from kind of start to finish here. We're going to kind of work off of that a little bit, and we'll probably work off the main 5 charts a little bit too as we kind of come across anything that's kind of useful for us. We'll just go ahead and we'll add it to that chart for the 1450, 1750. Like we said, we had done pretty much most of things from 600 to 1450 during the review session over the weekend. So we're kind of working towards 1450 to 1750 today, and then next week 1750 to 1914, and then I'll kind of wrap up the bulk of our review here. Okay, so just our little recap here. Obviously, like we said, over the weekend we did 600 to 1450. What we kind of described then is 600 to 1450 is kind of the beginning of links. It's the beginning of far-off places coming together for the first time. We talked about that was the era of the 4 M's, the Mongols, the Muslims, the Middle Ages, and the Ming Dynasty, although it's a lot more complicated than that because we have some outside groups obviously part of it as well. But we talked about how it's really the time period of connections, because we talked about the connections of the Crusades, we talked about the connections of long-distance long-distance travelers like Ibn Battuta and Jing He and folks like that. So that was kind of where we were before. Links and connections kind of on the rise here. All right, where we're going today then is we're taking 1450 to 1750 as kind of like our, as we had sort of described, Unit 3. Okay, and one of the questions they love asking is they love asking why somebody smart out there decided that 1450 was going to be like a really important break-off year. Like something kind of significant, happening in and around this time frame.
This is probably not right at all. It was
Okay.
the Columbian Exchange.
Well, when does the Columbian Exchange start?
I have no idea.
Or in the neighborhood, kind of, right? Columbian Exchange, which is going to kind of involve, obviously, increased contact, or the beginning of major contact between the Eastern and Western worlds. It's going to start after Columbus in 1492. So certainly, you're right. 1450 is very close to the era of European contact and European exchanges for the first time. So that's going to be a big part of it, right? Is there anything closer that's like very close to the year 1450? Yeah, Jordan? Absolutely. So that is the big one we want to know. And that year, actually, that was a dates quiz date we had before, was the year 1453. And what we say about 1453 is we have the Ottoman capture of Constantinople. Okay? All right. Now, you guys remember why we had said Ottoman Muslims taking that over is kind of such an important kind of bellwether point? What do we know about the city of Constantinople? What type of city is that?
It's a good trading city.
It's a great trading city, right? Great trading city, because in essence, it's kind of like the, we say it more or less, it's kind of like the connecting point between Eastern and Western trade routes. Okay, if you're going to get Eastern products from places like China and India and you're going to Europe, 9 times out of 10 they're going through the city of Constantinople. Therefore, the people that live in Constantinople, the merchants there, generally are pretty rich, right? Wealthy city. The Byzantine Empire had become a very wealthy empire for a very long time because of the trade that it controlled through the city of Constantinople, through the Dardanelles Straits, as it's called. Okay? So, with the Ottomans coming on, by the way, the Ottoman Empire, they've been around since like the late 1200s or so, but they finally got strong enough where they're able to take down the city of Constantinople in 1453. So, that's going to leave a little bit of an issue for Europeans. Europeans, by the way, that had kind of been opened up to the rest of the world. What was our event kind of in the Middle Ages where Europeans are opened up to the rest of the world for the first time? The Crusades. Now, Europeans are, for the first time, getting their heavy dose of Asian luxury goods. They're getting Asian technologies. They're getting new spices and new types of things they never had before. They're cooking, remember, was very bland during the Middle Ages. And all of a sudden, we're spicing that up a little bit more. And we're a little bit more opened up, basically, to the products of the East. Okay? So Europeans are hooked on Eastern products. Europeans like that stuff. And now there's kind of a question of... That wasn't a good throw.
No.
Somebody dropped a bat. Is that what it sounded
That's what it sounded like.
Baseball bat?
That'll be Mr. Mawa's. That'll be Mrs. Brechtel's problem next year, won't it? Then?
That will be. That's me going to the math hallway. I just worry about unruly kids down the hall. Not this quiet hallway that I have right now. So, like we said, Europeans still interested in the East. Europeans still like the products, obviously, the East, but now they have to get them in a different way. So, the reason why we kind of say 1450 is an important place to start is because what do Europeans now realize is their best option, basically, for getting Eastern products? It's going to be their best option. find new trade routes. Because let's face it, think about what the problem is. If Europeans continue to get their Eastern luxury goods through Constantinople, they're going to have to go through the Muslims. And they're going to have to go through, basically the Muslims serve as middlemen. You guys all know that middlemen, when they touch a product basically in the business cycle, that jacks up the price. And it causes things to be more expensive. So if Europeans want to keep their prices down and their merchants happy, they're going to want to get these products directly, right? So what we sort of look at here, and we're just going to kind of run through, I'm just showing you some old slides that we did kind of utilize in the past, so you have seen these things kind of in the past before. But if you kind of remember as well some of the motives and motivations, remember talking about this for why Europeans were motivated to find new trade routes. Now, before we went into the gold, glory, God thing, the 3 Gs, remember that the first thing that was really there was that Europeans were desiring and looking for a way to establish new trade routes, right? The second thing we said is that while they made those new trade routes, they established those new links, they found that sometimes they took them to places where they could access and find new resources. So that's a fantastic thing, obviously, as well. While they're doing kind of points 1 and 2, they realize it's probably pretty suitable and pretty nice to spread the influence of Christianity as well. And you kind of put that stuff all in its totality. We had kind of summed it all up by saying that a lot of times Europeans were exploring the New World based on the idea and the concept of what's called the 3 Gs, right? Gold, glory, and God, as a way to kind of get things rolling here. Okay, so that's where we had kind of introduced things here. As we said, 1450 is an important year because that's what we have. Europeans are going to kind of usher in this new era. What we had said before, and we had kind of done this right at the end of our last study session, is we had said that if we really kind of want to underscore what 1450 to 1750 is all about, that we can just simply call this the time frame of what is called the 4 E's. Okay? If the other one was the 4 M's, this one can be the 4 E's. Everything word?
Encounters, exploration, empires, and enlightenment.
Alright, encounters, exploration. I suppose we could even put exploration first, but it doesn't really matter. Encounters, exploration, empires, and the Enlightenments. Okay, and pretty much everything we talk about from one place to another can kind of fit pretty nicely with one of those 4 words here. Okay, can fit pretty nicely. So the first one we sort of start with, and that's why we could possibly put that one first, but it doesn't really matter. The first one we can kind of start with is exploration. Okay, we'd want to be able to understand the theme of why Europeans, after 1453, are going to try to explore new parts and new points basically in the world. I think we've kind of established that so far, right? So they're going to do it because they want to have those direct links, and they want to be able to access more desirable products from the East in a more direct fashion. Okay? Let's see here. This is just real quick review. I don't need you guys necessarily to, like you said, you had this down before. This is just kind of something to think about that we've sort of already discussed before, right? Old ways of trading versus new ways of trading. Remember the old ways, typically for Europeans, was over the Silk Roads, but right now the Silk Roads it's more, first of all, it's more dangerous. The Mongols aren't there anymore. Remember, we always give the Mongols kind of a bad rap, but big empires are actually very good for trade. They're very good for connections because they connect faraway places together pretty nicely. So Mongols are gone, that's bad. Silk Roads are dangerous because there's not one cohesive empire. Plus we also have the plague. The plague kind of like, doesn't necessarily want people to start, or doesn't necessarily cause people to want to go long distances here. And then like we said, Muslim merchants as intermediaries are expensive and you can only take low quantities of things. So the new process is going to be direct and it's going to use maritime trade. Let's face it, if I go to India and I pick up pepper in India, I can put a whole lot more pepper that's worth my while to sell if I can load up in a big ship rather than taking it just on whatever I can carry or whatever I can strap to an animal or whatever. Okay? So this is kind of what our new process looks like. This is how it plays out. So kind of working off this first thing on exploration, and maybe we could actually put this on the name 5 charts if you want to put a couple of things down. Really kind of like one of the things you might want to put for the name 5 charts on, first off, the global. You know the one on the top that starts with global? Global is like everywhere around the world. Essentially all you guys have to do for global there is just put down the 4 E's. Because if you're thinking about that as like the big overarching themes of this era, that's pretty much where we are. It's the 4 E's. Okay? It's the exploration, it's the encounters, it's the empires, the enlightenment. Okay? Why don't we go down a couple notches, down towards Europe, if we could. And for Europe, on the name 5 charts, can we put down, kind of working off this exploration theme, who are some of our important countries that kind of like took the lead? Or maybe who's our country that like started it all here for Europeans?
Portugal.
All right, it's going to be Portugal. It's going to be our first one, right? So why don't we put down for Europe, maybe we can just sort of start it with what we just call Portuguese exploration, right? Portuguese exploration. We just want to understand the Portuguese were the first ones to kind of like start the show and start the the concept basically of Europeans opening up direct links between Europe and Asia. All right, can we put down a couple of Portuguese explorers that are kind of important guys? Who's the guy even before da Gama? Diaz. So for Portugal, we can put down two guys, Diaz and da Gama. All right, Diaz and da Gama. Remember what Diaz and da Gama both do?
Go around some hamburgers.
All right, Diaz goes first, right? What does Diaz do?
Gets to the Cape of Good Hope.
Gets to the Cape of Good Hope, right? Gets to the Cape of Good Hope, actually kind of rounds the Cape of Good Hope, sees the Indian Ocean, but isn't necessarily sure supply-wise and what the Indian Ocean is made of. Remember, Europeans are not really familiar with the Indian Ocean. I mean, who would you have to go to be really familiar with the Indian Ocean at this time? What type of person? Obviously somebody from here, but what group of people for the last 500 years have been, this is their backyard? Was the Muslim merchants, right? You probably have to go through some sort of Islamic person. So Diaz is the first one to get there. He shows that it's possible. Remember, Diaz on his trip, it takes a very, very long time because he stays very, very close to the coast of Africa at all times. Very kind of leery about going far off into the sea. What do we actually learn later as we explore more and we know more about currents and winds and all that sort of stuff? You guys remember what the fastest way actually around Africa from Europe was? Yeah. Yeah, they found out actually if you went really, really far out and you looped almost so far out actually where you almost touch the coast of Brazil, that's how far out you go, you can actually hook up with very, very favorable wind patterns. Remember that concept was called Volta do Mar, which basically means to, sometimes to go to your destination you actually have to go further than you normally would want to. But it was just kind of a matter of understanding the wind and the current patterns throughout the oceans to kind of help you out. So we didn't know that stuff right away. Diaz didn't know that. Later sailors do pick that up. By the time of da Gama and later, Portuguese mariners are kind of understanding that and kind of exploring that. So Diaz gets there first. Important thing with da Gama is the guy that actually makes it all the way up to India. Remember, who does he get help from actually in the Indian Ocean? He stops off here in South Africa and he has to get some help from somebody. Who would it make sense that he gets help from probably? Muslim merchant, right? And he actually picks up a Muslim merchant in East Africa, and he basically talks to him about the monsoon winds and shows him the way the Indian Ocean works, and says, yep, this is how you do it, and basically took his help, okay? Big deal with da Gama then, of course. Da Gama comes back from India, returns to Portugal. Did you have that one test question once where it said, like, what was da Gama's travels important or something, and it was something about how he opened up direct maritime links for the first time between Europe and Asia. So that's our story with the Portuguese. They're really the ones that start the process and take the lead. Other thing to kind of think about why this is kind of significant, on their way, Europeans are also very fortunate, if you're looking at it like that, because on their way, they're passing the west coast of Africa. Remember Ghana, Mali, those empires over there right now? By this point, we're talking about the Mali Empire and later the Songhai Empire. What's the big product over here in West Africa you can pick up pretty easily? Gold. You can pick up gold. So what's great is you can pick up the gold, you can use that as a form of payment to pay for your luxury goods, and you can do so in a pretty efficient way. I can stop off for my payment on the way and pay for my products here. Okay? So that's our Portuguese story. Portuguese basically have this whole situation on lockdown. All right? They've got everything here all set. All right. Next place besides Portugal. Portugal starts it. That's their exploration. Who's our next group? It's probably important one to start with. All right. Portugal's big rival here is Spain. All right. So Spanish exploration looks a little bit different, right? Spanish exploration, probably the more famous of the two, just because of where we live here today. But Spanish exploration really kind of founded upon what individual here? Christopher Columbus. All right. Columbus, is he Spanish?
No, he's British.
He wasn't British. He wasn't Portuguese. Italian, right? Yeah. So he's from Italy. The only thing is, he just convinces the King and Queen of Spain basically to finance his trip. He was actually trying to sell the idea of his trip to a lot of different countries, and Spain was the one that actually kind of bought on it. He tried to sell the idea to Portugal and some other places, and couldn't necessarily get some support for it. So remember now, with Christopher Columbus, and what's our year for Columbus now?
1409.
1492, right? Said it really slowly there. In 1492, right? Real simply, our story with Columbus is, Portugal's got this route on lockdown basically, so Christopher Columbus, what his idea is, pretty simply, very, kind of astutely in this case, and I guess Columbus is right on some things, he's also, grossly underestimates other things, is he understands that if you do sail to the west, you'll eventually get to the east, and that he could possibly open up a more favorable trading route for Spain in this case. So Columbus is right, people had said, don't worry about the whole, is the world round or not, and did Columbus prove that? Most smart people back at this time in history, even going further back, knew the world was round. That wasn't the thing, contrary to kind of what we learned about probably earlier on. The real big thing to kind of understand about Columbus is Columbus underestimates how big the world is, right? Columbus thinks that somewhere around like Nova Scotia, Maine area here is Japan. He thinks that's where Japan is going to be, and China is kind of like right around here, and up around, then you're going to get to India, and it's not that far away, basically. Okay? So Columbus is right. Yeah, you'll eventually get to the east by sailing west. He just totally underestimated how big the circumference of the earth obviously is. Okay? So, Columbus makes that move, as we had said. Where does that kind of lead us to then? Because I understand these are our big explorers. You got Portuguese explorers, you got Spanish explorers. You also have the French. By the way, when the French are coming in, can you guys think about French exploration, what they're kind of looking for? They went kind of a different route, and they were looking for a different path to Asia. A lot of French explorers did.
The Northwest Passage.
Yeah, do you remember the Northwest Passage? The passage through North America that a lot of the French thought were there. So did the British. Remember the British and the French? They get a little bit of a later game on, a little bit of a later step on things. But the British and the French are kind of largely exploring this like northern section of North America. That's because by this point in time, Columbus and then later Spanish explorers in the late 1400s, early 1500s are pretty much running the show here in both Central America, Mesoamerica, and South America. So the Spanish kind of have that route and that kind of situation here on lockdown. So we'll kind of go from here then. Is kind of looking at the early exploration things. From exploration, the other kind of aspect we look at then is what we just simply call encounters. Okay? Why do we kind of say encounters? Europeans were going there originally, right? To look for new trade routes and to explore ways to the east. And what do they stumble upon? They stumble upon these new continents and these new people. So now all of a sudden we have new encounters. Can you guys throw out there maybe some terms or some terminology, whatever, dealing with encounters? What was the nature of the encounters between these people from the old world and people encountering the civilizations of the new world? What are some characteristics of maybe what happens here? Some demographic things, some social things,
Disease.
what do you say? All right, so one big part of it is we're going to have to talk about disease, right? The introduction of diseases to the New World, and how you largely have these societies that were largely, obviously, separated for as long as they were. Probably a good idea to put on here, guys, if you want to, under both North America, South America, Latin America, what can we put down? I understand that's both of those two boxes, but who are the, if we're going to look at like 1450, who are our empires that are living here in North America, South America, Middle America? We're talking about the Aztecs and the Incas, right? First and foremost, Aztecs and the Incas. Aztecs being the big Mesoamerican society, Incas being the South American society. So we got the Aztecs and the Incas. Rest of North American natives, what again did North American natives kind of largely look like? More nomadic in nature, right? Less settled, big empires. Remember the empires of like the Aztecs, for instance. That's a really sophisticated empire with the nature of what they were sort of doing. It doesn't necessarily look like that in the rest of North America. Okay? What can we maybe also put down for North America and Latin America in terms of the arrival of Europeans causes what as far as native populations go? Native populations get completely decimated, right? Huge, huge drop. Huge decrease, right? We're talking about tens and tens of millions of people here. We don't even have super accurate statistics on it, but huge population losses, right? At the hands of European diseases and European warfare. Let's not escape that. You know, that's part of the story too. But by and large, the huge majority of people are being lost here as a result of native populations. Can you guys think of one other maybe effect, if you're talking North America, South, Latin America, that also happens at this time, happens to these populations? What do they increasingly become when it kind of relates to all these new encounters? All right, so now for the first time, we have, you said that very provocatively. We have for the very first time, we have mixed races. We have mixed societies. Could you guys kind of run through pretty accurately the mixed societies, the mixed races, the names of them? Do we know the difference between all of them too? Mestizos is a mixed race individual of a old world and new world. Who else do we have besides that?
Peninsula African.
All right. We have, now, in some cases, the social classes change differently. If you're talking about right, social classes, and we're back.
That's
Right.
good.
If we're talking just straight social classes, remember you had your Peninsulares on the top,
Creoles.
you've got your Creoles, you've got mestizos, you've got slaves, etc. But if we're talking straight up like mixed races, remember the difference between, for instance, a mestizo is going to be a mixed person between Spanish and Portuguese and native ancestry. We also have mulattoes, which are European and African. And we also have that group called Zambos, right, which is going to be African and native mixed together. Bottom line is, what happens to society? What happens to these social classes? They become a lot more complex, they become a lot more mixed, right, than they ever were before. So we do see some of these major changes all kind of happening as a result of that. Okay, so that's really kind of where we're going to go. I think what we're going to do is we're going to kind of cut it short right now, so I'll let you guys get on your way here. But the next thing we're going to kind of do is we sort of looked at exploration today, look at all those different ways the New World is exploring. And then tomorrow what we'll do, and kind of over the next couple of days, we'll kind of bounce on each one of these other themes.